Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine a place where the sky and the earth touch, where divine promises echo through the centuries, and where millions of people converge in search of redemption, justice, or simply peace. Now, open your eyes. That place exists. It has a name, Jerusalem. Jerusalem is not just a city, it is mentioned more than 600 times in the Bible, becoming the epicenter of prophecies, wars, and prayers over millennia. This is where the divine seems to meet the human, where eternal promises were made, and where invisible battles still seem to be fought. But why does this small strip of land, surrounded by mountains and valleys, carry so much spiritual and historical weight? Why does Jerusalem continue to be the pulsating heart of faith and at the same time such a profound point of discord? Today, we will unravel the spiritual secrets of Jerusalem, from its biblical roots to its role on the modern stage. By the end of this video, you will understand why this city remains the central point of conflicts, hopes, and prophecies. Our journey will be divided into three major parts. First, we will explore the biblical origins of Jerusalem, discovering how it was chosen by God as the site of the temple and the symbolism behind that choice. Next, we will dive into the prophecies that place Jerusalem at the center of apocalyptic events, connecting the past and the future in surprising ways. Finally, we will analyze how this holy city became the epicenter of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, reflecting on the human and spiritual narratives that shape its history to this day. Before we begin, I want you to ask yourself, what does Jerusalem represent to you? A promise, a conflict, or perhaps an opportunity to understand something greater? Regardless of your answer right now, prepare yourself for a journey that transcends physical and temporal boundaries. Jerusalem is not just a city, it is an idea, a memory, a prophecy, and as we will see, it carries with it the eternal weight of the Holy Land. Jerusalem was not chosen by chance. Its history begins long before its walls were built or its temples constructed. To understand the spiritual weight of this city, we need to go back to the beginning, to the time when God established an eternal covenant with Abraham and his descendants. The first mention of Jerusalem in Scripture appears subtly but profoundly significant. In the book of Genesis, chapter 22, we read about the sacrifice of Isaac. God asks Abraham to offer his beloved son as proof of faith. The designated location for this event is Mount Moriah, exactly where, centuries later, Solomon would build the first temple. This connection transforms Jerusalem into more than just a geographical point. It becomes a symbol of obedience and divine provision. But why Mount Moriah? Why Jerusalem? The answer lies in its spiritual symbolism. In the Bible, mountains often represent closeness to God. They are places of revelation, prayer, and encounters with the divine. And Jerusalem, situated in a mountainous range, became the intersection between heaven and earth. It is here that God chose to manifest his presence uniquely throughout history. This divine choice becomes even clearer when we read about David, the king anointed by God. It was he who brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, transforming it into the spiritual capital of Israel. But why did David choose this specific city? The answer lies in its strategic and symbolic position. Jerusalem was a neutral city located between the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. By establishing it as the capital, David unified the people of Israel under a single spiritual and political banner. Later, his son Solomon built the first temple on the same Mount Moriah, solidifying Jerusalem as the spiritual heart of the nation. This temple was not just a building, it was a theological statement. It symbolized the presence of God among his people. It was here that the Israelites came to offer sacrifices, seek forgiveness, and celebrate biblical festivals. Jerusalem became the epicenter of Jewish worship, a terrestrial reflection of God's heavenly throne. But there is something even deeper in this choice. Jerusalem is not just a physical place, it is a promise. In Scripture, the city is described as Zion, a term that goes beyond its geography. Zion represents the eternal dwelling of God, a concept that transcends time and space. This is why, even after the destruction of the first and second temples, Jerusalem never lost its spiritual significance. It remains alive in the memory and prayers of the Jewish people who await its complete restoration. To illustrate this point, imagine an invisible bridge connecting heaven to earth. This is the essence of Jerusalem in the Scriptures. It is the portal where divine promises find their fulfillment, where the eternal touches the temporal. It is no wonder that prophets like Isaiah and Joel describe Jerusalem as the place where God will decisively intervene in the last days. And here we arrive at a crucial point. Jerusalem is not only important for the past, it also points to the future. Its biblical roots are the foundation upon which the prophecies we will explore in the next chapter rest. As we will see, the divine choice of Jerusalem was not arbitrary. It was carefully planned to fulfill purposes that transcend generations and even eras. If the biblical roots of Jerusalem already reveal its importance as a meeting point between the divine and the human, the prophecies about the city elevate its meaning to an even deeper level. Jerusalem is not just a place of the past or present. It is a key piece in God's plan for the future of humanity. When we open the pages of the Old Testament prophets, we find Jerusalem in almost every apocalyptic vision. It is described as the epicenter of the final events, where good will face evil in a decisive battle. But why Jerusalem, and how do these prophecies connect to the modern-day scenario? Let us start with the prophet Ezekiel, whose visions are some of the most detailed regarding Jerusalem's role in the future. In Ezekiel 40:48, he describes a new Jerusalem, a restored temple, and a renewed system of worship. This vision is not merely architectural, it is deeply spiritual. The new temple represents the restored presence of God among men, and Jerusalem is the center of this restoration. For many Christian scholars, this description points to a future time when God will definitively establish his kingdom on earth. Another crucial prophet is Zechariah, whose book dedicates much of its message to Jerusalem. In Zechariah 12:3 we read, "On that day I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who try to lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will gather against it." This passage is often interpreted as a reference to the final battle of Armageddon, where Jerusalem will be the focal point of a global conflict. But here is what makes these prophecies so fascinating. They are not just distant predictions. They have echoed throughout history, shaping events and decisions up to the present day. For example, the creation of the State of Israel in 1948 was seen by many as the beginning of the fulfillment of these prophecies. Religious and political leaders often cite these passages to justify their actions or interpretations about the future of Jerusalem. The connection between biblical prophecies and modern events is even more evident when we look at the Temple Mount, the site where the first and second temples were built. Today, this same mount houses two of the holiest structures in Islam, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This overlap of spiritual meanings transforms the Temple Mount into a microcosm of the conflict between different visions of the divine. For many Christians, the reconstruction of the Third Temple in Jerusalem is a clear sign of the fulfillment of prophecies. Messianic groups and pro-Israel organizations often promote this idea, arguing that the return of ancient sacrifices and rituals will mark the beginning of the end times. For Muslims, however, The presence of Al-Aqsa on the Temple Mount is proof that Jerusalem belongs to Islam since the time of the Prophet Muhammad. These divergent narratives create constant tension, fueling the cycle of violence and disputes we see today. But the prophecies about Jerusalem are not limited to conflict. They also speak of hope and redemption. In Isaiah 65:17-19, the prophet describes a new Jerusalem, a city where there will be no more crying or mourning. This vision contrasts with the images of war and destruction found in other passages, offering a perspective of peace and restoration. This duality, conflict and hope, is what makes Jerusalem so central to biblical prophecies. It is both the stage for the final battle and the place where God will establish his eternal kingdom. It is here that the forces of evil will be defeated and where peace will finally prevail. But how do these prophecies impact the modern world? To answer this question, we need to look beyond the scriptures and observe how religious and political leaders interpret these messages. For example, many evangelicals view supporting the state of Israel as a spiritual obligation based on the promises made to Abraham and his descendants. Some Islamic groups, on the other hand, interpret the same prophecies as a call to defend Al-Aqsa and resist Israeli occupation. These divergent interpretations create an intriguing paradox. Jerusalem is simultaneously a symbol of unity and division. For some, it represents God's promise. For others, it is a political and religious battleground. And here we arrive at a crucial point. The prophecies about Jerusalem are not just ancient stories. They continue to shape decisions, movements, and conflicts in the modern world. In the next chapter, we will explore how these prophetic visions manifest in recent history and in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. As we will see, Jerusalem is not just a disputed city. It is the pulsating heart of a struggle that transcends physical and temporal borders. If the biblical prophecies about Jerusalem offer us a spiritual and eschatological vision, the modern history of the city reveals how these divine promises intertwine with human, political, and cultural disputes. Jerusalem is not just a spiritual symbol. It is also a battleground where national, religious, and historical identities collide. To understand the current conflict between Israel and Palestine, we need to delve into the transformations that shaped Jerusalem throughout the 20th century. The creation of the State of Israel in 1948 was a historic milestone that forever changed the fate of Jerusalem. For many Jews, this event represented the fulfillment of a millennia-old promise, the return to the land promised by God to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But for the Palestinians, that same date marks the beginning of the Nakba, catastrophe, when hundreds of thousands of Arabs were expelled from their ancestral homes and lands. These two parallel narratives, one of hope and the other of loss, define the dilemma of Jerusalem to this day. Jerusalem was divided for the first time after Israel's War of Independence in 1948. The western part of the city came under Israeli control, while the eastern part, including the Old City and its holy sites, was occupied by Jordan. During those 19 years, East Jerusalem became off-limits to Jews, who could not access the Western Wall or other historical sites. This division symbolized not only a physical separation, but also an emotional and spiritual rupture for many Israelis. Everything changed during the Six-Day War in 1967. In just 6 days, Israel conquered vast areas, including the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and, crucially, East Jerusalem. The reunification of the city was celebrated as a historic triumph by Israelis, who finally regained access to the holiest sites of Judaism. However, for the Palestinians, this military victory represented a new wave of displacement and occupation. East Jerusalem, which houses the majority of the city's Arab population, came under Israeli administration, intensifying tensions since Then Jerusalem has been the epicenter of territorial and identity disputes. For Jews, Jerusalem is the eternal and indivisible capital of Israel, a claim reinforced by the official recognition of the United States in 2017. For Palestinians, however, East Jerusalem is the projected capital of their future independent state. These opposing claims turn every decision about the city, from the construction of new settlements to the status of holy sites, into a point of international friction. An emblematic example of this tension is the Temple Mount, known to Muslims as Haram al-Sharif, noble sanctuary. This site houses both the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, two of the holiest structures in Islam. For Jews, it is the location of the first and second temples, the spiritual heart of their faith. The overlap of these narratives creates an explosive situation where any alteration to the status quo can trigger violence. Recent incidents, such as temporary restrictions on Muslim access or attempts at Jewish prayer at the site, have exacerbated tensions. But the conflict surrounding Jerusalem goes beyond territorial disputes. It reflects deeper questions about identity, memory, and belonging. For Jews, Jerusalem is a divine promise, an ancestral heritage that should never have been lost. For Palestinians, it is their homeland, a place where their families lived for generations before the arrival of European Zionists. These narratives are not just different, they are mutually exclusive, making any diplomatic solution difficult. The emotional impact of this dispute is palpable. Imagine growing up hearing stories about how your family was forced to leave their home during the Nakba, only to see that same house occupied by another family. Or imagine being a Jew returning to the Holy Land after centuries of diaspora, only to face resistance and hostility. These personal experiences fuel cycles of resentment and revenge that perpetuate the conflict. However, not everything is bleak. Despite the tensions, there are moments of coexistence and dialogue. Interfaith organizations and peace groups work tirelessly to promote mutual understanding and find solutions for the future of Jerusalem. These efforts, though small in scale, show that there is room for hope even amid the chaos. And here we arrive at a crucial point. Jerusalem is not just a disputed city, it is a reflection of universal human struggles. Its walls hold memories of conquests and losses, of faith and doubt, of war and peace. In the next chapter, we will explore how these human dimensions intertwine with invisible spiritual battles, revealing Jerusalem's role as a portal between heaven and earth. As we will see, the city is not just a physical battlefield, it is also a spiritual battleground where celestial and earthly forces collide. If the modern history of Jerusalem reveals its political and human dimensions, there is another layer often overlooked, the spiritual dimension. For many believers, Jerusalem is not just a city contested by nations and peoples, it is also an invisible battlefield where celestial and earthly forces collide. It is here that the divine and the human meet in a cosmic confrontation between light and darkness. This spiritual perspective finds echoes in biblical texts, apocryphal writings, and religious traditions that suggest the presence of angels, demons, and other spiritual entities in Jerusalem. In the book of Daniel, for example, we read about a celestial battle involving the angel Gabriel and the prince of the kingdom of Persia, a reference to spiritual forces influencing human events. Although the text does not explicitly mention Jerusalem, its connection to divine promises makes it a strategic point in this invisible conflict. But what exactly does it mean to say that Jerusalem is a spiritual battlefield? To answer this question, we need to explore two central ideas: the divine presence and resistance to God's plan. The first idea is the divine presence. In the Bible, Jerusalem is described as the place where God chose to dwell among men. Psalm 46:4-5 says, "There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells." God is within her. She will not fall. This image of Jerusalem as a place where God is present reflects its importance as a spiritual portal. For many Christians, this divine presence is not just historical, it is eternal. Jerusalem is seen as the point where heaven touches earth, where the prayers of the faithful reach God's throne. However, this divine presence also attracts resistance. In Ephesians 6:12, Paul writes, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." This passage suggests that there are spiritual forces opposing God's plan, and Jerusalem, as the epicenter of that plan, becomes a primary target. This spiritual resistance can be seen in the human tensions surrounding the city. Why is Jerusalem so often the focus of attacks, wars, and discord? Why do so many cultures, religions, and nations feel the need to control it? For some, the answer lies beyond the physical. They believe that visible battles, wars, protests, attacks are reflections of invisible battles fought in the spiritual realm. A powerful example of this idea can be found in the book of Revelation. In Revelation 11, Jerusalem is described as the site where two prophetic witnesses will be martyred during the end times. These witnesses symbolize divine truth, facing direct opposition from the forces of evil. After their death, they resurrect and ascend to heaven, marking a decisive moment in the victory of good over evil. This passage not only reaffirms Jerusalem's centrality in eschatological events, but also highlights its role as a spiritual battlefield. But this spiritual dimension is not exclusive to Christianity. In Islam, Jerusalem is also seen as a place of great spiritual importance. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, located on the Temple Mount, is considered the third holiest site in Islam, where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven during the night journey. This connection transforms Jerusalem into a meeting point between the divine and the human for Muslims as well. However, this same spiritual importance makes the city a target of disputes and tensions. For Jews, Jerusalem is the spiritual heart of their faith. The Western Wall, the last remnant of the Second Temple, is a powerful symbol of connection to God. Millions of Jews around the world turn their faces toward Jerusalem during prayer, reaffirming their bond with the holy city. This collective devotion creates a unique spiritual energy, which many believe is palpable even today. But how do these spiritual battles manifest in the physical world? A clear example lies in the tensions surrounding the Temple Mount. This site, sacred to Jews, Muslims, and Christians, is often the scene of violent confrontations. Every incident, whether restrictions on Muslim access or attempts at Jewish prayer at the site, is seen as a threat to the established spiritual order. These disputes are not just political. They have deep roots in spiritual narratives that transcend time and space. Another example is the construction of Israeli settlements in East Jerusalem. For many Palestinians, these settlements represent not just territorial occupation, but also a violation of their spiritual and cultural identity. For Israelis, however, they are seen as an affirmation of their biblical heritage and connection to the Promised Land. These opposing views reflect a larger struggle between different conceptions of the divine and the human. And here we arrive at a crucial point, the spiritual. Battles in Jerusalem are not just abstract. They have tangible consequences in the physical world. Every decision about the city, from the status of holy sites to the construction of new settlements, is shaped by spiritual narratives that transcend generations. In the next chapter, we will explore how these spiritual dimensions manifest in the contemporary conflict between Israel and Palestine. As we will see, Jerusalem is much more than a disputed city. It is the pulsating heart of a struggle that defines identities, narratives, and hopes for millions of people. Jerusalem is not just a city, it is the epicenter of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, a symbol that encapsulates the aspirations, memories, and struggles of both peoples. To understand the depth of this confrontation, we need to explore how Jerusalem became the focal point of national, religious, and political narratives that define this century-old dispute. The origin of the conflict, a promised land, two narratives. The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has deep historical roots, but its modern manifestation began to take shape in the late 19th century with the rise of the Zionist movement. This movement, led by Theodor Herzl, sought to establish a national home for Jews in the land of Israel, in response to the persecutions and pogroms that devastated Jewish communities in Europe. For Zionists, Jerusalem was the spiritual heart of this promised land, a direct connection to the divine promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. However, for the Arabs living in the region, many of whom identified as Palestinians, the arrival of Jewish immigrants represented a threat to their homeland. They viewed Palestine as their ancestral land, where their families had lived for centuries. For them, Jerusalem was equally sacred, both for its Islamic significance and its cultural and historical importance. These two narratives, one based on biblical promises and the other on historical and cultural ties, collided with the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. The war that followed resulted in the division of Jerusalem and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, marking the beginning of decades of tension and violence. Jerusalem, a divided symbol. After the Six-Day War in 1967, when Israel conquered East Jerusalem, the city was reunified under Israeli control. For Jews, this represented a historic triumph, the return to the eternal capital of their people. However, for Palestinians, this reunification was seen as an occupation, a denial of their rights and national aspirations. Jerusalem thus became a divided symbol. For Israelis, it is the indivisible capital of their state, a fulfilled promise. For Palestinians, it is the projected capital of their future independent state, a reminder of everything they have lost. These opposing visions transform every decision about the city, from the construction of new settlements to the status of holy sites, into a point of international friction. The Temple Mount, the heart of the conflict. If there is one place that encapsulates the complexity of the conflict, it is the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif. For Jews, this is the site of the first and second temples, the spiritual heart of their faith. For Muslims, it is the third holiest site in Islam, housing the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. This overlap of spiritual meanings creates an explosive situation where any alteration to the status quo can trigger violence. Recent incidents illustrate this tension. In 2017, the installation of metal detectors at the entrances to the Temple Mount sparked widespread protests and violent clashes. For Palestinians, this measure was seen as an attempt to change the status quo and restrict their access to a sacred site. For Israelis, it was a necessary security response following a deadly attack. This episode shows how seemingly practical issues, such as security measures, can quickly become matters of identity and sovereignty. Human narratives, memory, and trauma. Behind these territorial and religious disputes are deeply personal human stories. Imagine growing up hearing stories about how your family was forced to leave their home during the Nakba catastrophe of 1948. Or imagine being a Jew returning to the Holy Land after centuries of diaspora, only to face resistance and hostility. These experiences shape the collective narratives of both sides, perpetuating cycles of resentment and revenge. For Palestinians, the Nakba is not just a historical event. It is an open wound that continues to influence their struggle for justice and recognition. For Israelis, the Holocaust and anti-Semitic persecutions are memories that justify the need for a secure Jewish state. These traumatic memories create a dynamic of fear and distrust that makes any diplomatic solution difficult. Attempts at peace and proposed solutions. Over the decades, various attempts have been made to resolve the conflict, including proposals for territorial division and peace plans. The most widely accepted idea is the two-state solution, which envisions the creation of an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel, with East Jerusalem as its capital. However, fundamental issues remain unresolved. The fate of Palestinian refugees, the final status of Jerusalem, border security, and the removal of Israeli settlements. Each of these issues is profoundly complex, but Jerusalem is particularly sensitive. How can a city so central to both sides be divided? And if it is not divided, how can we ensure that both communities have access and representation at their holy sites? These questions remain unanswered, fueling the cycle of violence and stalemate. Jerusalem as a reflection of universal struggles, more than a territorial dispute. The conflict surrounding Jerusalem reflects universal human struggles, the search for identity, belonging, and justice. Its walls hold memories of conquests and losses, of faith and doubt, of war and peace. For millions of people around the world, Jerusalem is much more than a city. It is a symbol of hope or pain, depending on where you stand. And here we arrive at a crucial point. Jerusalem is not just the center of the conflict between Israel and Palestine. It is a reflection of human struggles that transcend borders and generations. In the next chapter, we will explore how prophecies and visions about Jerusalem continue to shape the future of this holy city. As we will see, the legacy of Jerusalem is eternal, but its destiny remains open. If Jerusalem is the epicenter of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, it is also the point of convergence for visions and prophecies about the future of humanity. For many believers, the city is not just a physical or spiritual battlefield. It is the stage where the final events of human history will unfold. But how do these prophecies manifest in Christian, Muslim, and secular perspectives? And what are the possibilities for the future of Jerusalem in an increasingly globalized and interconnected world? The Christian vision, Armageddon, and the return of Christ. In Christian tradition, Jerusalem occupies a central place in eschatological prophecies. The book of Revelation describes the city as the site of the final battle between good and evil, known as Armageddon. While the term Armageddon is often associated with a catastrophic war, its biblical origin points to a specific location, Mount Megiddo in the Jezreel Valley, north of Israel. However, Jerusalem is widely seen as the focal point of this battle, where celestial forces led by Christ will confront the forces of the Antichrist. This vision is reinforced by other biblical passages that describe Jerusalem as the site of Christ's triumphant return. In Zechariah 14:4, we read, "On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem." This image of Christ returning to earth in Jerusalem is a central promise for many evangelical Christians who see the restoration of the city as a clear sign of the fulfillment of Scripture. But what happens after this final battle? Christian prophecies suggest that Jerusalem will be transformed into a new Jerusalem, a celestial city where God will dwell eternally with his people. In Revelation 21:2, John writes, "I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband." This vision of peace and redemption offers a powerful counterpoint to the images of war and destruction found elsewhere in the text. For many Christians, these prophecies are not just ancient stories, they are living promises that shape their actions and hopes in the present. Pro-Israel movements, for example, often cite these passages to justify their support for the Jewish state, arguing that the reunification of Jerusalem under Israeli control is a sign of the fulfillment of these prophecies. The Muslim perspective, Judgment Day, and the importance of Al-Aqsa. For Muslims, Jerusalem also plays a crucial role in visions of the future. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, located on the Temple Mount, is considered the third holiest site in Islam, where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven during the night journey, Isra and Miraj. This connection transforms Jerusalem into a symbol of spirituality and transcendence. In Islam, the Day of Judgment is often associated with events that will occur in Jerusalem. Islamic traditions suggest that the Dome of the Rock will be the site where the faithful will be summoned to account for their actions. Additionally, it is believed that Jesus, known as Isa in Islam, will return to earth to defeat the Antichrist, Dajjal, and restore justice before the end of time. These visions reflect a deep reverence for Jerusalem, but also a concern for its protection. For many Muslims, any threat to the integrity of Al-Aqsa is seen as a violation not only of a sacred site, but of their faith and collective identity. This explains why issues like the status of the Temple Mount continue to generate global tensions, secular visions, diplomacy, and coexistence. Although religious perspectives dominate much of the discourse about Jerusalem, there are also secular approaches that seek practical solutions for the city's future. For diplomats and political leaders, Jerusalem represents both an opportunity and a challenge. How can a city so deeply divided become a symbol of coexistence and peace? One widely discussed proposal is the internationalization of Jerusalem, transforming it into an open city administered by a neutral entity, such as the United Nations. This idea was first mentioned in the 1947 partition plan, but was never implemented, due to opposition from both sides. However, some experts argue that a similar solution could be revisited, especially in a context of increasing globalization and interdependence. Another secular approach is the creation of shared arrangements for holy sites, ensuring that both Jews and Muslims have equal access. Recent examples, such as the joint administration of religious sites in other conflict contexts, show that coexistence is possible, though extremely challenging. Hope and transformation. A shared future. Despite the deep divisions surrounding Jerusalem, there are moments of hope that suggest a shared future may be possible. Interfaith organizations and peace groups work tirelessly to promote dialogue and mutual understanding. These efforts, though small in scale, show that there is room for reconciliation, even amid chaos. A powerful example is the work of religious leaders advocating for an inclusive vision of Jerusalem. For them, the city should not be monopolized by a single community, but celebrated as a shared heritage of humanity. This vision resonates with sacred texts from various traditions, which emphasize the importance of hospitality, forgiveness, and compassion. But for this vision to become reality, centuries of distrust and resentment must be overcome. This will require not only political commitments, but also profound changes in the collective narratives of both sides. It will be necessary to recognize that Jerusalem belongs not just to one nation or religion, but to humanity as a whole. And here we arrive. At a crucial point, the future of Jerusalem is not set in stone. It depends on the choices we make today, choices that can perpetuate the cycle of violence or pave the way for peace. In the next chapter, we will conclude our journey by reflecting on the eternal legacy of Jerusalem and what it represents for each of us. As we will see, the spiritual and historical weight of this city continues to echo through the centuries, shaping our present and our future. Jerusalem is not just a city, it is an idea, a memory, a prophecy. Throughout this journey, we have explored its biblical roots, its role in prophecies, its modern history, and the visions of its future. Each chapter has brought us closer to understanding why this small strip of land carries so much spiritual, political, and emotional weight. Now, we reach the final point of this exploration, but not the end of Jerusalem's story. What makes Jerusalem so unique? It is the convergence of so many narratives, identities, and human aspirations in one place. For Jews, it is the eternal capital of their promised homeland, the spiritual heart of their faith. For Muslims, it is the third holiest site in Islam, where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. For Christians, it is the stage for the final events of human history, where Christ will return to establish his eternal kingdom. And for millions of people worldwide, regardless of their faith or origin, Jerusalem is a universal symbol of hope, resilience, and conflict. This multiplicity of meanings is both a blessing and a challenge. On one hand, it transforms Jerusalem into a place of unparalleled cultural and spiritual richness. On the other, it creates deep tensions between different visions of the divine and the human. How can a city so central to so many people be divided or shared? This question remains unanswered, but perhaps the real question is another. How can we transcend our differences and find a common path? Before concluding, I want you to ask yourself again, what does Jerusalem represent to you? Perhaps it is a promise, the promise of a home, a connection to the divine, or a better future. Perhaps it is a conflict, a reminder of the divisions and injustices that still plague our world. Or perhaps it is an opportunity, a chance to understand something greater, something that transcends our human limitations. Whatever your answer, one thing is certain. Jerusalem is not just a distant city or an abstract concept. It is a living part of human history, shaping our lives in ways we often don't even realize. Its walls hold memories of conquests and losses, of faith and doubt, of war and peace. It challenges us to look beyond our own perspectives and recognize the complexity of the world we live in. Despite the tensions and disputes surrounding Jerusalem, there are reasons for hope. The very existence of the city, surviving millennia of wars, invasions, and transformations, is a testament to its resilience. It teaches us that even amid chaos, before we wrap up, I want to extend a special invitation to you for making it this far. If this video brought a word of edification, revelation, or simply touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and give it a thumbs up. Here we share teachings based on the Word of God, unveiling truths that can transform your life and strengthen your faith. And there's more. I prepared a special gift for you. In the comments, I've left exclusive material that will help you dive deeper into the Holy Scriptures. It's a powerful tool to help you grow spiritually and better understand God's plans for your life. Head over to the comments now to access this gift. While you're there, let me know. Where are you watching from? I'd love to know what city you're in so we can see how far the Word of God is reaching. Your participation is very important to us because every comment is a seed planted to reach even more people with the Word of God. May the Lord richly bless you and grant you wisdom to walk in His purposes. Click on the screen to watch the next video, where we'll continue this journey of faith and knowledge together. Stay in the peace of the Lord.